Hello there. Well, for decades, successive governments have known that the state pension system is financially unsustainable. And despite this, both the Labour and the Conservatives have failed to enact a meaningful reform. As the baby boomer generation retires, the flaws in this system are becoming increasingly obvious. Pensioners now face uncertainty and frustration, not only because of the mechanics of the welfare state, but also because of the political choices that prioritise short-term optics over long-term stability. Now, the UK pension system is often described as a pay-as-you-go model, where today's workers fund today's pensioners. Unlike a private pension fund, contributions are not invested and being ring-fenced for the contributor. No, instead they're absorbed into the general government revenue to be spent on other things. The design inevitably creates tension as the ratio of workers to retirees shrink. The scheme starts to resemble a Ponzi structure, dependent on new contributors to sustain the old ones. Governments have been fully aware of this demographic time bomb. Since the post-war settlement, reports have continuously and consistently warned about the ageing population and increased life expectancy. That would put an unbearable pressure on welfare spending. Now, they knew about this, and yet the reforms were either cosmetic, like, for example, raising the retirement age, or politically timid. This is such as the triple lock, which guarantees to appease current pensioners without addressing structural costs. Now, Labour's political brand is built on protecting vulnerable groups, including pensioners. However, the party also seeks credibility with the financial markets, middle-class voters, by appearing fiscally responsible. The tension is visible in Labour's approach to the welfare reforms. The winter fuel payments were restricted to save money, cutting support for millions of pensioners. And they put a decisive spin on that as well, if you remember. And it's only now, after the backlash of falling polls, did Labour perform a partial U-turn, restoring them for lower and middle income retirees. So I'm going to get the winter fuel allowance this year, but I was told last year that I was on too much money and I didn't need it, when I wasn't. It's very, very handy for me as a pensioner, but by and by. Now, the broader focus has now shifted towards supporting working age households and reducing dependency, narratives leaving older people at the risk of being sidelined. The party avoids deep pension reform because it fears alienating a crucial voting bloc. Yet simultaneously it cannot ignore the Treasury's warnings about the spiralling costs of an unreformed system. Labour's dilemma is therefore political cowardice. It chooses short-term fixes rather than confronting the generational unfairness at the heart of the state pension system. And then we've got the Tories, The Conservatives have historically positioned themselves as the defenders of pensioners, especially through the triple lock, which guarantees annual rises in line with the highest of earnings, inflation, or 2.5%, whichever is the highest. Yet this policy has become one of the most expensive welfare commitments in government spending now, and it's costing approximately £130 billion per year. £130 billion. Well, why didn't the Tories, the wonderful Tories, with all what they had for the last 10, 12 years or so, why come they never restructured the system? Well, they didn't want anything to rock the boat, such as the electoral dependency. Pensioners are one of the most reliable Tory voting groups. Upsetting a pensioner and they could see some key constituencies disappear. Then we've got the short-termism. The true reform for the true reform would require a higher contributions from today's workers or lower benefits for tomorrow's retirees. Now these are politically toxic, so the government kicks the can down the road. Not touching that. Then we've got the internal divisions of the Tories. Tories like Kemi Bennacock argue that reforming the triple lock, others fear backlash and demand protection for pensioner perks. And this is causing a paralysis within the Tories. And yet the Conservatives know the system is unsustainable, but cling to symbolic promises, preferring to let future governments confront the reckoning. Now the real test has arrived, as us baby boomer generation, the largest and longest living cohort in British history, has now reached retirement age. The warnings were clear for decades. The demographic shift would overwhelm the pay-as-you-go pension model. Yet neither Tory or the Labour acted decisively before now. The crunch. Instead of reforming early when changes could have been phased in gradually and fairly, they postponed action until costs have now exploded. By protecting their own short-term political survival, they created a sharper crisis for today's workers and pensioners alike. Now, the most damning part of this story is what could have been. What could have been if the National Insurance, the NI, had been structured as a funded pension scheme. Something like Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund or Australia's compulsory superannuation. Today's retirees would be better off. On the UK minimum wage, a worker pays about £2,700 a year in national insurance. Now over 35 years with modest investment growth. All that, 4% a year. That would have built a pot up of around £186,000. At retirement, that pot could have provided a £9,000 a year income. And that might have been on top of the state pension. With millions of workers paying in, the UK could hold a multi-trillion pound national pension fund, generating returns that could pay pensioners sustainably for generations. Instead, the governments spent NI contributions as they came in, leaving nothing saved for the future. This choice locked the UK into a Ponzi-like scheme. Today's workers pay for today's retirees, while tomorrow's workers must shoulder an even heavier burden. And I don't think any pensioner of today wanted that. You know, we're pensioners. I've paid in. I want paying out. And successive governments have just buried their heads in the sand. Heads down, asses up. I'm alright, Jack, because my pension's alright. Which it is. Now, the results of the decades-long failure in it is a bitter paradox. Some pensioners who've worked and contributed all their lives feel penalised, as mean-tested top-ups allow others with shorter working histories, less contributions, to be just as well off or even better off. Now, rising costs mean governments are increasingly tempted to restrict universal benefits, and this is pitting taxpayers against older citizens in the political debate. Trust in this system has eroded for many younger people, doubting if they will ever receive any meaningful pension at all. The state pension in its current form is always destined to face crises as the demographics shifted. Both Labour and the Conservatives known this for decades. Yet fear of electoral backlash, short-term political gains and unwillingness to change the Ponzi-like structure of a system has left me and millions of pensioners exposed. Instead of addressing the sustainability before the baby boomer wave was on its way, governments chose denial. If the NI, National Insurance contributions, had been invested rather than spent, blown on whatever, Britain might today have a multi-trillion pound fund, ensuring secure, decent pensions for all. Instead, pensioners are caught in a broken system, uncertain of what they'll receive and resentful that their decades of contributions have not been secured in dignity in the retirement that they were promised. We did the right thing. In the meantime, take care. Bye now.